He quietly closed the hatch and almost tripped over the motorcycle thing. It was surprisingly light but sturdy, but Rico was able to catch himself and kick it out of the way at the same time. His heart stopped a beat and he looked around to make sure nobody heard. There was not a sound in the whole small ravine. Rico then made his way around the hybrid car to the hood and carefully lifted the hood and pulled out the stand, setting it in place. There the battery was. It looked brand new. Rico wondered if there was anything wrong with the car, or if maybe it ran. Rico cared little. Finding the keys could turn out to be a waste of time, and this vehicle couldn't drive off-road for 2 seconds, so using the multi-tool, Rico was able to make quick work of disconnecting the battery. He was very careful to not make contact with the two leads and fry himself or make any unnecessary noise. Once the leads were loose and pointed away, Rico got the battery out of the hybrid vehicle and hefted the nearly new battery into his wheelbarrow as quietly as possible. He managed to avoid smacking the battery on anything or smashing his hands and set it into the wheelbarrow gingerly. Hiss. Rico heard a hissing noise as the wheelbarrow let out all of its tires air. I guess that's as far as the fixie flat was gonna buy me, Rico sighed to himself, figuring the rest of the can would be a waste and leave him stranded halfway. Also, the car battery was way too heavy for him to carry more than a couple 100 feet. It weighed close to 60 pounds, Rico imagined. As if on cue, he felt more than heard a rumbling in the distance. Something was coming. Looking around frantically, Rico realized there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. This trip would be for nothing and no wheelbarrow and no battery, and he was very distraught. Right then a memory popped into his mind of riding a bicycle through an apocalyptic city for some reason and thought of the bike. Recalling crawling over some webbing in the back of the car, he opened the rear hatch and unlatched the webbing and threw it over his head. Rico then picked up the hybrid electric bike and wheeled it to the wheelbarrow. The wheels seemed sturdy and like they were built for off-road mountain biking. He put the kickstand down and hefted the battery onto a steel basket on the back of the bike, designed for carrying small-sized belongings. The springs on the bike, to absorb weight, barely strained. Rico understood that the bicycle-motorcycle hybrid was considerably overbuilt, which made him happy. He took the netting draped over his head and wrapped it around the battery so it would be sturdy, then took off. Whoever was coming down the road, Rico realized, may be hostile. Hopping on the bike and kicking up the stand, Rico took off as fast as he could. He pedaled as fast as his legs would take him down the road. Rico hoped the people would stop at the car and he could escape once breaking the line of sight over the next hill. He pedaled, and the vehicle got closer behind him over the hill. Frantic, Rico looked for some buttons to press to hopefully switch gears so he could make it up the hill more efficiently. The saddle in between the hills had gone well, but the incline was wearing him out quick. Due to the battery, he was tugging along. He wished he'd been able to attach the battery to the front somewhere, but there had been no room. So he felt like he was tugging 100 pounds behind him, though it was only 40. It felt like 60, though. Rico tried everything he could to get his mind off it, and seconds felt like hours. He began mashing the buttons as he was already nearing exhaustion and the heat halfway up the hill, his momentum lost, and his vehicle about to crest the hill behind. He found a button that switched from his pedal power to the stored electrical power. Upon pressing the button, the bicycle switched to motorcycle mode, and he jetted up the hill at a brisk 35 miles per hour, completely silent. Rico pedaled away, not seeing a gauge anywhere on how much power was stored. It was probably there somewhere, but he was in panic mode trying to escape. He crested the hill as flashbacks came of a guy in a truck, speeding around bends and turns, being pursued. Rico shook his head to clear his thoughts and almost tumbled down the hill. The motorcycle auto-corrected his angle, though, and saved him from what would have been a horrible crash, considering he had no helmet or other padding. His head worked clearly again. He sped and pedaled as fast as the bike would take him. A thought had been to potentially ride across the plains to enter his property from the back end, hoping potentially the people behind him weren't in a four-wheel drive, but they sounded like they'd been in a big vehicle. The last thing Rico wanted to do was to make a giant smoky trail directly to his homestead. He had an access gate out back that he left open, but didn't want anyone to find it. It was too small for pickup trucks, but the last thing he needed was punks in mopeds riding around on his property or something. He took the most direct route and got to his gate as he heard the vehicle rev back up, again cresting the hill. Them stopping at the car hadn't bought him much time. He got himself on the bike and the gate, shut it behind him, and rushed back in his house to hunker down. There were already some new boxes at the door, so he threw them inside. Getting his tea and parking the bike behind his house, he went inside, shut the door, got his radio and listened for chatter, and peered out towards the gate. Then he waited. Chapter 8. The clock is ticking. Nobody pinged him on the radio of the local repeaters or any of the common simplex channels. Nobody came down the road. It was Rico, all alone. Did he imagine the whole thing? He looked around and everything was as it was. He looked at the radio, some memories trying to painfully bubble to the top. A radio in a truck, maybe? Maybe some radios at a large public event or something? It made him dizzy, so he tried to stare at a cleared-off piece of floor to gain clarity again. He realized he was breathing heavy and a drip of blood hung off the tip of his nose and some more out his mouth, but he quickly started to calm down. He checked his phone and some time had passed, so maybe he'd fallen asleep and dreamt the entire situation. There was still some time left of the day, so he decided to go outside and see if he could hear anything. Rico's tea was sitting outside and nearly done. He checked it for bugs, and it was still bug-free. There was a hybrid motorcycle-bicycle combination sitting out there, though, with a deep cycle vehicle battery on it. Now, Rico did remember that. There'd been a large vehicle chasing him or something to that effect, and he got this bicycle-motorcycle deal but had to sacrifice his wheelbarrow. A fair trade, Rico consoled to himself. He eyeballed the battery, and it seemed to be in good shape. Rico brought the heavy battery inside and set it in the space he'd cleared and plugged in all the leads. The charge controller had a few digits and buttons blinking from the solar, but had nothing really to do with the power. Energy. Once Rico plugged in the battery to the charge controller and inverter, the entire system lit up happy with lights. In tandem, the charge controller for the hot water also lit up and set to prioritize the new incoming power source. With some quick math, Rico saw that the solar panels would bring in more than enough power to charge the battery healthily and keep the hot water going all day. If he needed to, it would be easy to switch the hot water over to battery or whatever if he wanted. Otherwise, he could use the inverter off the battery to plug in his drone and phone. Excited, he went and got the drone backpack and plugged it in along with his phone. Both started charging away. A check on the charge controller showed that the battery was nearly at full power and was beginning to cycle. Satisfied, Rico went back outside to see what there was to do. Chapter 19, remainder of the day, or Chapter 9, I'm sorry. Remainder of the day. Digging through the cellar that Rico had, he found cases of water that he had stored behind. He always knew they were here and probably even used some when his friends were over last, but his mind had been really preoccupied. A bottle in each hand, he stuffed one in his pocket after taking out the fixie flat and setting it on the counter. It wobbled for a second and then stopped. Rico nodded to it, downing a half a bottle of water in a seemingly single gulp. Rico hadn't realized how thirsty he was. The water hit his exposed nerves in his mouth and he nearly screamed in pain. He already knew he didn't have any emergency dental stuff in his cupboards. Out of frustration or as a distraction from the oral pain, he got out his multi-tool and went through his new boxes. While lamenting he'd likely get no more boxes due to his closed gates, he opened these final boxes to see some essential oils and dental kits, cotton swabs and clove oil along with wax and dental cement. There was also varying sizes of sanitized gauze. Lastly, there was a squirter-type bottle with an angled nozzle in millimeter denominations. Rico's jaw throbbed in pain as he read through the instructions. Firstly, it said to rinse the wound out with water using the syringe-looking squirter, so he did that. The water from the bottle wasn't too hot or too cold, but the water still hurt as Rico felt the water pressure loosen crud from his mouth and into the sink. After 3 or 4 rinses all throughout his mouth, it was time for the next step. The textile kept indicating eugenol was what he needed to be looking for pain relief, so that's what Rico looked for. The clove oil's main ingredient was a high percentage of eugenol, so that must be the right thing. Reading through the instructions, it showed many ways to use the clove oil or clove bud, including letting gauze soak in it or try to squirt or drop a few drops into the spot. Throbbing increased as Rico felt ready to either scream or cry in pain and quickly got a pair of disposable nitrile gloves on. He read that this oil could burn the living hell out of your skin if you got it on you.